Picture this. You're standing on a sunlit beach, waves gently lapping at the shore, when suddenly the horizon darkens with black sails. Within minutes, your entire world shatters, not with a romantic sword fight or a treasure map, but with screaming, chains, and the sickening realization that you're about to become cargo. For women captured by pirates throughout history, this wasn't the beginning of an adventure story. It was the first day of a living hell that would make modern horror films look like children's cartoons. What pirates really did to their female captives wasn't just shocking, it was a carefully orchestrated system of dehumanization so calculated, so brutal that entire coastal populations would abandon their homes at the mere rumor of sails on the horizon. And here's the twisted part. Some of these practices were completely legal, written into official codes, sanctioned by governments, and considered just another day's work in the maritime economy of human suffering. The myth of the romantic pirate needs to die a violent death because the reality was infinitely darker. When Laurens de Graaf and Nicholas van Horn descended upon Vera Cruz on that May morning in 1683, they didn't just rob a town, they orchestrated a masterclass in psychological torture. Their method was almost elegant in its cruelty. Round up over 6,000 people, cram them into churches without food or water, and let them marinate in their own fear and waste for days. The women weren't just victims of circumstance. They were strategic assets, living currency in a twisted economy where human flesh had a fluctuating market value. But here's where it gets truly grotesque. The pirates didn't even bother hiding what they were doing. They cataloged their human inventory with the same casual efficiency a merchant might use for counting barrels of rum. Women were assessed, appraised, and categorized. This one for ransom, that one for the slave markets, those over there for the captain's personal collection. The bureaucracy of brutality was almost more disturbing than the violence itself. And if you think that was isolated to the Caribbean, let me introduce you to the Barbary corsairs, who turned the entire Mediterranean and North Atlantic into their personal hunting grounds. In June 1627, these maritime nightmares landed on Iceland's Westman Islands and casually abducted 242 people. Not soldiers, not criminals, but fishermen, mothers, children, the elderly. They swept through like a plague, except plagues are indiscriminate. These raiders were surgical in their selections. 2 years later, they hit the Faroe Islands and carried off 30 women and children, leaving behind only corpses and smoke. The most chilling part? This wasn't even considered unusual. It was just Tuesday for the corsairs, another successful hunting expedition to stock their holds with screaming merchandise. The sack of Baltimore in 1631 reads like a horror screenplay written by a sadist. Murat raised the younger, and yes, there was an elder, because apparently terrorizing civilians was a family business swept into this Irish coastal town, and vanished over 100 people into the Mediterranean night. Most were never seen again. Think about that for a moment. Not most died, most simply ceased to exist in any recordable way, swallowed by a system so vast and so efficiently evil that individual human beings became statistical rounding errors. Contemporary estimates suggest that between 1500 and 1780, over 1 million Europeans were seized by North African pirates alone. 1 million. That's not a raid. That's industrial-scale human harvesting. And here's the sickest joke of all. While European nations were busy colonizing the world and lecturing about civilization, their own coastal populations were being regularly emptied like fishermen's nets, with women and children bearing the worst of it. But the real nightmare wasn't the capture, it was what came after. See, pirates understood something fundamental about breaking human beings. You don't just take away their freedom, you take away their identity, their agency, their very sense of self. Women faced what historians politely call multiple layers of vulnerability, which is academic speak for every single thing that could go wrong, did go wrong repeatedly. Separated from families? Check. Held as hostages in conditions that would make medieval dungeons look comfortable? Check. Sold into concubinage, which is just slavery with a more palatial setting? Check. Used as bargaining chips in ransom negotiations, where their value fluctuated based on how desperate their families were? Check. And if all else failed, there were always the slave markets, where women were paraded, inspected. The cruelty wasn't random or chaotic. It was systematic, almost scientific. Pirates and corsairs had centuries to perfect their methods, to figure out exactly how much terror to inflict for maximum profit, how to break resistance without damaging the merchandise, how to turn human beings into tractable property. They developed techniques, shared best practices, wrote actual guidelines for managing their human cargo. This wasn't barbarism in the sense of mindless violence. It was barbarism elevated to an art form, codified into law, and practiced with the casual efficiency of any other trade. And women weren't just victims in this system. They were the system's most valuable and most vulnerable currency, caught in a nightmare that wouldn't end until death, ransom, or the infinitesimally small chance of escape finally came. Now let's talk about forced marriage, Pirate Edition, because nothing says romance like being claimed as property by the man who just slaughtered your family. Zheng Yi Sao, the legendary Chinese pirate queen, actually codified this horror into her fleet's official rules. Her code stated that pirates could only form relationships with female captives through marriage, and they had to remain loyal to these wives. Sounds almost civilized, right? Wrong. This wasn't protection. It was systematized possession with a legal veneer. The marriage didn't transform a captive into a partner. It transformed her from communal property into private property, from potential gang violence victim into one man's exclusive captive. The loyalty requirement wasn't about love or respect. It was about preventing crew conflicts over human resources. When you're running a floating criminal enterprise, you can't have your men fighting over who gets which terrified woman. Much better to formalize the ownership structure and move on to more important matters, like which coastal village to devastate next. But here is where it gets deliciously twisted. This marriage system was actually considered progressive by pirate standards. Think about that. The baseline was so horrifically low that saying you can only claim one captive woman at a time and you have to stick with her qualified as enlightened policy. Western pirates rarely bothered with such formalities. Mediterranean corsairs might present a captured woman to their commander's household under the guise of marriage, but everyone understood was just concubinage with paperwork. Caribbean buccaneers didn't even pretend that much. Their articles rarely mentioned captive marriages at all, probably because the reality was too ugly to codify. The marriage served multiple purposes, all of them revolving around control. It legitimized the captor's claim. It prevented crew disputes. It enforced social hierarchy. And most importantly, it gave the woman absolutely no avenue for refusal. The ceremony wasn't a celebration of union. It was a public performance of subjugation, a ritual that announced to everyone that this woman's autonomy had been permanently transferred to her captor. For the women involved, this pseudo-matrimony was psychological warfare dressed in wedding clothes. Imagine being forced to participate in the mockery of one of your culture's most sacred institutions, to speak vows under duress, to play the role of willing bride, while every cell in your body screams resistance. The pirates understood the power of this corruption. By forcing women into marriage, they weren't just claiming bodies, they were claiming souls, forcing their captives to become complicit in their own captivity. It was gaslighting on a civilizational scale, a way to make brutality look legitimate, to transform violent possession into something that could be defended as cultural practice. And the worst part? Some women, faced with the alternative of being available to the entire crew, might have viewed it as the lesser evil, which is exactly how the system was designed to work. Give people two terrible choices, and they'll pick one, never realizing that the real crime is having to choose at all. Once the forced vows were complete, the real nightmare began. Confinement. Not the romantic locked-in-a-tower type, but the shove dash into dash, a dash ship single quotes S dash hold dash with dash no dash light dash or sanitation type. Elizabeth Marsh, captured by Moroccan corsairs in 1756, described the moment of her surrender with chilling pragmatism. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trying to escape would mean death, so they waited like lambs for the slaughter. What followed was what she politely termed a period of containment and extreme vulnerability, which is very British code for things too horrible to describe in detail, lest society think me indelicate. Ship holds designed for cargo or male prisoners were suddenly repurposed for women, children, and the elderly. Picture a space barely tall enough to crouch in, no windows, no fresh air, packed with terrified humans in various states of physical and emotional collapse. The darkness wasn't metaphorical. It was literal, absolute, broken only by whatever dim light filtered through the deck grating. This wasn't just imprisonment. It was a deliberate process of dehumanization. By confining women in conditions fit only for livestock, pirates were sending a message. You are no longer people. You are cargo. You are inventory. The below-deck phase served as a transition period, a liminal hell where captives were systematically stripped of everything that made them individuals. Their clothes, their dignity, their names, their sense of being human rather than commodity. Pirates knew exactly what they were doing. Keep people in the dark long enough, deprive them of basic needs, isolate them from any protective community. And by the time you bring them back into the light, they're already broken, already malleable, already prepared for whatever fresh horror comes next. The hold wasn't just a holding cell, it was a factory for manufacturing compliance, a place where free people went in and property came out. But the pirates weren't keeping these women for themselves. Oh no. The really profitable move was to sell them to someone with deeper pockets and higher status local warlords, sultans, governors, anyone with the wealth and power to pay premium prices for premium goods. Helen Gloag's story reads like dark fairy tale written by someone who hates happy endings. Captured by Moroccan corsairs in 1750, she was sold to a wealthy Moroccan, who then presented her to Sultan Sidi Mohammed bin Abdallah like a particularly exotic gift basket. She became his consort, eventually one of his principal wives, which sounds like a rags to riches story until you remember that she didn't choose any of it. She was traded up the power chain like a valuable collectible, her worth increasing with each transaction, until she ended up in the Empire. Sultan S. harem gilded cage is still a cage, and being a Sultan S. favorite wife when you never wanted to be anyone. S. wife is just slavery with better accommodations. The female slave bazaars of places like Istanbul, Avat, Pazarlari operated with the casual efficiency of any marketplace, except the merchandise screamed and begged and pleaded. Women from across Europe and beyond were displayed, inspected like cattle check the teeth, examined the skin, assessed the breeding potential, and sold to the highest bidder. The trade in captured women wasn't some underground criminal operation. It was a legitimate, legally sanctioned business with market rates, trade agreements, and established supply chains. Women became units in an economic equation, their value determined by youth, appearance, and perceived docility. Being traded to a warlord or elite household meant permanent bondage, often with no realistic hope of ransom or escape. These women were absorbed into power structures, where they existed as both assets and liabilities, subject to conversion pressures, forced cultural assimilation, and the whims of owners who held literal life and death authority over them. The truly disturbing thing? This entire system, the raids, the captures, the forced marriages, the confinement, the trade, was just business as usual for centuries. Coastal populations lived in perpetual terror, sometimes abandoning entire settlements, rather than risk the morning they'd wake up to black sails on the horizon. The women who survived, who endured being reduced to bargaining chips in humanity's most grotesque ledger, weren't just victims, they were witnesses to a system so vast and so normalized that it reshaped civilizations. Their suffering wasn't an aberration or an excess of war. It was a fundamental component of maritime economics, a tax paid in human flesh by the vulnerable to the violent. And the sickest joke of all? While this was happening, the same societies losing women to pirates were busy conquering other lands and claiming to bring civilization to the savages. Turns out, the real savagery was always closer to home, written into legal codes, sanctioned by authorities, and practiced with the bureaucratic efficiency that makes industrial-scale horror possible. These women didn't just survive. They bore witness to humanity at its absolute worst, and their silence in the historical record speaks louder than any scream ever could.